Please save my wife first." The man was bleeding out, trapped in an upside-down car, and the person kneeling beside him wasn't a doctor or a cop. It was Jack DuPont, the most feared mafia boss in the city. Jack made one call instead of dialing 911. And by morning, the people hunting this couple would realize they'd made a fatal mistake. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. The city at midnight had a heartbeat most people never heard. Not the clubs or the sirens or the late-night traffic, those were just noise. The real pulse lived in the spaces between. The hum of streetlights over empty intersections. The distant rumble of freight trains. The way shadows moved when no one was watching. Jack DuPont knew that heartbeat better than most. He drove through it now, his black Mercedes gliding down the industrial boulevard like a predator that had already eaten. The road stretched ahead, slick from earlier rain, reflecting neon signs and sodium lamps in fractured streaks of color. His hands rested easy on the wheel. His mind, as always, worked 3 moves ahead. A meeting had just ended. Not the kind with handshakes and contracts, the other kind. The kind where men spoke in careful sentences and left with new understandings about how things would be. Jack had said very little. He usually did. When you controlled enough of the city's underbelly, silence carried more weight than threats. He checked his watch. 12:17 a.m. Late, but not unusual. Then he saw the car. A silver luxury sedan BMW. Maybe Audi tore past him in the opposite lane, engine screaming, weaving erratically between the faded yellow lines. Jack's eyes tracked it in his rearview mirror, instinct sharpening. The car wasn't just fast. It was desperate. He eased off the gas, watching. The sedan swerved hard right, fishtailing, overcorrecting. Brake lights flashed red, then white, then red again in rapid panic. Whoever was driving had lost control of more than just the vehicle. Jack had seen fear before. This was it, doing 70 in a 35 zone. His jaw tightened. "Not your problem," he told himself. "Keep driving," but he didn't. The sedan's tires shrieked as it veered left, clipping the curb. The whole vehicle shuddered violently, suspension bottoming out, and then chaos. The car flipped. Once, twice. Metal screaming against asphalt. Glass exploding outward in 1,000 glittering shards. Sparks showering from the undercarriage as it skidded across the wet road on its roof, spinning, finally slamming to a stop against the base of a streetlight. Silence. Jack hit the brakes. His Mercedes stopped 20 yards from the wreck, headlights cutting through the settling dust and steam. He sat there for 3 seconds, engine idling, hands still on the wheel. Walk away. You don't need this. But something about the crash felt wrong. Not the violence of it, he'd seen worse. It was the why. That car hadn't been joyriding. Someone had been chasing it. Or something had gone very, very wrong inside it. Jack killed the engine and stepped out. The night air smelled like burnt rubber and gasoline. His dress shoes crunched over broken glass as he approached the wreck. The sedan lay overturned, wheels still spinning slowly, headlights flickering. Steam hissed from the crushed hood. One door hung half open, bent at an unnatural angle. Jack knelt beside it, peering inside. A man? 50s, maybe older. Gray hair matted with blood. His face was pale, slick with sweat, eyes half open and unfocused. He wore a brown jacket and a white shirt now soaked crimson. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. Beside him, a woman. Younger than him, dark curly hair, face bruised and bloodied, unconscious. Her head rested against the crumpled passenger window, body twisted at an angle that made Jack's chest tighten. The man's eyes found Jack's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the man's hand shot out trembling, desperate, and gripped Jack's wrist with surprising strength. His fingers were cold. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Please." Jack leaned closer. "Please, save my wife first." The words hit harder than they should have. Jack had heard dying men beg before, for mercy, for more time, for forgiveness. But this was different. This man wasn't asking to be saved. He was asking Jack to save her, even now, even bleeding out. Jack's throat tightened. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He moved. The door was jammed. Jack braced his foot against the frame and pulled. muscles straining, until metal groaned and gave way. He reached in carefully, sliding one arm beneath the woman's shoulders, the other under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, limp, still breathing, but barely. Blood soaked through his white shirt as he lifted her free of the wreckage and laid her gently on the asphalt. Her head lolled to the side. There was a deep gash along her temple, another across her side where the seatbelt had cut into her. Jack shrugged off his suit jacket and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding. His hands moved on autopilot: check pulse, check airways, apply pressure. He wasn't a medic, but he'd kept men alive long enough to get answers before. This wasn't so different. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Not 911, a private number. I need a medical team. Now. Industrial and 5th. Car accident. 2 victims. Critical. No police. No questions. He hung up. The man in the car was still conscious. Barely. His eyes followed Jack's every movement, wide with something between terror and gratitude. Jack returned to the wreck and knelt beside him. Your wife's stable, Jack said quietly. Help's coming. Don't move. The man tried to speak, but only blood came out. His grip on Jack's wrist weakened, fingers slipping. Stay with me, Jack ordered, his voice low and firm. You hear me? Stay awake. But the man's eyes were already rolling back. 3 minutes later, headlights appeared. Not an ambulance, a black SUV and a van, unmarked, moving fast. Men in plain clothes poured out, carrying equipment. They worked efficiently, no wasted words, loading both victims onto stretchers. Jack stood back, watching. His shirt was ruined. His hands were red. He should have left by now, should have disappeared before anyone asked questions. But when the van doors closed and the convoy started moving, Jack walked back to his Mercedes, got in, and followed. He didn't know why. Not yet. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sterile glow that made 2AM feel like some kind of purgatory between the living and the dead. Jack sat in a plastic chair near the emergency wing, elbows on his knees, watching doctors move behind frosted glass doors with the kind of urgency that meant someone's life hung in the balance. His shirt was still damp with blood that wasn't his. He'd removed his tie at some point, couldn't remember when. A nurse passed young, exhausted, her scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon hearts. She glanced at him, then away quickly, as if she'd seen something in his face she didn't want to understand. They all looked at him that way. Even here, where crisis was routine and strangers poured through these doors bleeding and broken every night, Jack DuPont registered as different. He knew what they saw. The expensive watch, the tailored pants, the blood-soaked white shirt, the eyes that didn't blink enough. They saw a man who didn't belong in a public hospital at 2 a.m., holding vigil for people he shouldn't know. But he'd made calls, quiet ones. The couple wasn't in a public hospital anymore, not really. They were in a private wing. Jack's money had opened up, receiving care from surgeons who didn't ask questions because the answers might complicate their mortgages. Still, he waited. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Confirmation. They'd live. Maybe. Or maybe just proof. Proof that stopping had meant something, that the man's dying words hadn't been wasted on someone incapable of honoring them. Please, save my wife first. Jack leaned back, closing his eyes. The memory hit him differently now, in the stillness. Because the truth was, men had begged him for mercy before, dozens of them, over the years. And Jack had looked into their eyes and done what needed doing anyway. He'd built an empire on the principle that sentiment was weakness, that compassion was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. You stopped for nothing. You felt nothing. You moved through the world like a blade, clean, sharp, necessary. His father had taught him that. 15 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like cigarettes and desperation, watching his old man across the table. Blood on his knuckles. Always blood on his knuckles. You want to survive this life? His father had said, voice rough from a lifetime of bad choices. You don't stop. Not for anything. Not for anyone. The second you hesitate, the second you care, you're done. Jack had believed him. Had to. Because the alternative was admitting his father was just a violent drunk who justified his cruelty with philosophy. At 17, Jack had stopped hesitating. At 19, he'd stopped feeling. At 23, he'd stopped counting the bodies. By 30, he'd become exactly what the city needed him to be. A force, predictable in his ruthlessness, reliable in his efficiency. The man you called when problems needed to disappear and you didn't want to know how. He'd climbed over bones to build his empire, some of them metaphorical, some not, and he'd done it all without stopping once. Until tonight. A door opened. One of his men, Dorian, mid-30s, ex-military, good with guns and bad with small talk, emerged from the surgical wing and crossed the hallway with purpose. He sat down beside Jack without asking permission. Both stable, Dorian said quietly. Woman's awake. Asking questions. Man still under. Doc says next few hours are critical, but he'll probably make it. Jack nodded once. Relief hit him like a blow he hadn't braced for. They asking about me? Jack said. The wife doesn't remember the crash yet. Trauma, probably. Doctors say it's normal. Dorian paused. But she will, eventually. And when she does? She's gonna want to know why a man like you pulled them out. Dorian's voice was careful. Not quite questioning, but close. Hell, we're wondering why you pulled them out. Jack didn't answer immediately. His hands hung between his knees, still faintly stained despite scrubbing them in the bathroom sink. He stared at them like they belonged to someone else. They were running, Jack finally said. So? So someone was chasing them, hard enough to flip a car. Jack's jaw tightened. That wasn't an accident. Still not our problem. It is now. Dorian studied him. Boss, you want me to find out who they are? Run backgrounds, financials, enemies? Jack nodded slowly. Quietly. No flags. No traces. Done. Dorian stood to leave, then hesitated. You know the guys are talking, right? About this. Jack's eyes lifted cold, flat. Let them talk. They're saying you're going soft. Do I look soft to you? Dorian held his gaze for 3 seconds, then shook his head. No, sir. Then tell them to focus on their jobs, not mine. Dorian left. Jack exhaled slowly. His men were loyal, but loyalty only stretched so far when you started acting unpredictable. In his world, unpredictable meant vulnerable. Vulnerable meant dead. But that man's voice kept echoing. Save my wife first. Jack had seen soldiers make sacrifices. Business partners take bullets meant for others. Even watched a father throw himself in front of his son during a deal gone bad. But this had been different. This man hadn't been a soldier or a martyr. He'd been ordinary, terrified, dying, and his last thought hadn't been survival or revenge or even fear. It had been love, pure, irrational, unshakable. The kind of love Jack had spent 30 years convincing himself didn't exist. Or if it did, that it was weakness disguised as virtue. He'd been wrong. Jack stood up, his knees stiff from sitting too long. He walked to the window at the end of the hallway and stared out at the city below his city, the one he'd bled for and broken men to control. It looked different tonight. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe he just felt bigger, heavier. A man who does not stop becomes unstoppable. His father had been right about that, but what his father never told him was what happens when you finally do stop. When you kneel beside a stranger and make a promise without words. When you remember what it feels like to care whether someone lives or dies. Jack pressed his palm against the cold glass. Somewhere upstairs, a woman was waking up. Somewhere else, a man was fighting to survive. And Jack DuPont, who had spent a lifetime not stopping, decided he wasn't done yet. The room was too white, too quiet, too unfamiliar. Ella Matthews' eyes opened slowly, lids heavy as if weighted down by something she couldn't name. The ceiling above her was a grid of acoustic tiles and recessed lights. Medical equipment beeped somewhere to her left, steady, rhythmic, indifferent. She tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her ribs. Easy. The voice came from the corner low, controlled, masculine. Ella's head snapped toward it, instant panic flooding her veins. A man sat in the chair by the window, half-shadowed despite the morning light filtering through the blinds. Dark hair, sharp features, a ruined white shirt still stained with rust-colored patches. Her breath caught. Who? You're safe, he said, not moving. You're in a hospital. You were in an accident. Accident. The word felt wrong, like trying to hold water in her bare hands. Fragments surfaced headlights in the rearview mirror, Peter's knuckles white on the steering wheel, the sound of their tires screaming, her own voice screaming louder. Peter! His name tore out of her. Where's Peter? Where's my husband? Upstairs, stable, still unconscious, but the doctors say he'll make it. Ella's hands found her face, trembling fingers exploring the bandages wrapped around her temple, the IV taped to her wrist, the ache radiating through her entire body. She felt fragmented, incomplete, Like crucial pieces of herself were still scattered across some dark road she couldn't quite remember. I don't understand. Her voice cracked. What happened? Who are you? Jack leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The motion brought his face into better light. There was something about his eyes, gray, calculating, but not unkind. They studied her the way a surgeon might study an X-ray, looking for fractures beneath the surface. My name is Jack. I found you. Pulled you both from the wreck. Why? The question seemed to surprise him. His jaw tightened. Because you needed help. Ella stared at him, trying to reconcile the expensive watch on his wrist with the blood on his shirt, the careful distance he kept with the fact that he'd apparently saved her life. Nothing about him made sense. He looked like money, and danger had a child and named it Tuesday. You're not a doctor, she said. No, not a paramedic. No, then why? She stopped, the memory hitting her like a fist. The car, the speed, the mirrors full of headlights that wouldn't stop following. Oh God, Jack's posture shifted. You remember? Ella's hands twisted in the thin hospital blanket. Yes, she remembered. Not everything the crash itself was still a blur of sound and violence, and Peter's hand squeezing hers so hard she thought her fingers would break. But she remembered what came before. The phone call 3 days ago. Peter's voice shaking as he told her what he'd found at the construction site where he worked. The metal case buried in the foundation trench. The money inside, so much money it didn't seem real. They'd reported it. Of course they'd reported it. That's what good people did, wasn't it? But the men who came weren't police. They said it belonged to them. Ella whispered, eyes unfocused, staring at nothing. Said Peter stole it. We tried to explain we didn't take it. We called it in, but they didn't believe us. Jack said nothing, just listened with the stillness of someone who knew when silence was more useful than questions. They came to our house. Ella's voice dropped. Threatened our daughter. She's 14. She was right there in the living room when they... She couldn't finish. Tears welled up, hot and sudden. We ran. Peter said we had to run until we figured out what to do. We were trying to get to my sister's place upstate, but they followed us. They were right behind us when her breath hitched. The beeping on the monitor accelerated. Jack stood smoothly and moved closer, not touching her but near enough that his presence felt grounding rather than threatening. Breathe. Slowly. You're safe now. Safe. Ella's laugh was brittle, edged with hysteria. They know where we live. They know about Maya. They think we have their money. They won't touch you. The certainty in his voice stopped her cold. Ella looked up at him. Really looked. And saw something that made her pulse slow for a different reason. This wasn't reassurance. This was fact. Delivered with the casual confidence of a man who controlled outcomes the way other people controlled thermostats. How can you possibly know that? Jack's expression didn't change. Because I'm handling it. Handling it how? Who are you? Someone who keeps his promises. You didn't promise me anything. No, Jack said quietly. I promised your husband. Ella's throat closed. She remembered Peter's hand reaching across the center console in those final seconds before impact. Remembered him saying something, though she couldn't hear it over her own screaming. But now, looking at this stranger with blood-stained clothes and eyes like winter, she understood. He asked you to save me first, she whispered. Jack nodded once. And you did. Yes. Why? The question came out broken. You don't know us. This isn't your problem. Why would you? Because he loved you more than his own life. Jack's voice was rough, as if the words cost him something. And that mattered. Ella's vision blurred with tears. She tried to speak but couldn't. All she could do was nod, hands pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jack stepped back, giving her space. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. The men who chased you, he said, not looking back. Do you know who they were? Names, faces, anything? Ella wiped her eyes, forcing herself to focus. One of them, the leader, he had a scar. Right here. She touched her cheek, and an accent. Eastern European, maybe Russian. He kept calling Peter a thief. Jack absorbed this without visible reaction. Anything else? He said. He said if we didn't return the money by Friday, he'd make sure our daughter watched us die. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jack turned slowly, and for the first time, Ella saw something beneath the controlled exterior. something cold and vast and absolutely merciless. "What's today?" he asked softly. I don't know. It's Wednesday." Ella's heart hammered. "Then we only have—" "You have nothing to worry about." Jack opened the door. "Rest. I'll check on your husband." "Wait." He paused. "Why are you really doing this?" Jack considered the question for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Because for once, I want to be the reason someone lives instead of the reason they don't." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Ella alone with the beeping machines and a hope she didn't quite trust yet, but it was hope nonetheless. The warehouse district looked different at noon. Less menacing. Just crumbling brick and rusted chain link, the kind of industrial decay that happened when factories closed and cities forgot neighborhoods existed. But Nikolai Kozlov knew better than to trust daylight. He stood inside a gutted auto repair shop, its windows soap-smeared and cracked, watching his men check their phones for the 20th time in an hour. 3 of them, Victor, Alexei, and the new kid whose name he kept forgetting, sitting on overturned crates, restless, hungry. They'd been hunting Peter and Ella Matthew for 3 days now. Should have been simple. Corner them, recover the money, make an example, clean, professional. Instead, the targets had vanished. Nikolai touched the scar running down his left cheek, a gift from a Serbian arms dealer in '08, and tried to suppress the irritation crawling up his spine. He didn't like loose ends. Loose ends became complications. Complications became bodies, sometimes his own. "Anything?" he said in Russian, voice flat. Victor looked up from his phone. Hospital records show 2 John Does admitted through emergency Tuesday night. Car accident. 1 man, 1 woman. No names released. Location? Street Catherine's. Private wing. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. Private wing meant money. Money the Matthews supposedly didn't have. Who's paying? Records are sealed. Somebody made calls. Interesting. The Matthews were nobody, a construction foreman and a high school teacher. They lived in a modest house in a modest neighborhood and drove a 7-year-old sedan. Not the kind of people with connections to private hospital wings, unless someone else was involved now. "Pull traffic cameras from Tuesday night," Nikolai ordered. "Highway 9, industrial corridor. I want to see the crash." Alexei, the tech-savvy one, nodded and hunched over his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through city systems with practiced ease. 30 seconds later, footage appeared on the screen. Grainy, timestamp burned into the corner, 12:19 a.m. The Matthews sedan tearing down the empty highway, Nikolai's chase car 200 yards behind. Then the flip, violent, spectacular, the kind of crash that usually killed everyone inside. But that wasn't what made Nikolai lean closer. It was what happened after. A black Mercedes appeared in frame, slowing to a stop. A man got out tall, well-dressed, moving with purpose. He approached the wreck without hesitation, pulled both victims free, made a phone call. Minutes later, an unmarked SUV and van arrived. No ambulance, no police, no official anything. "Run the plates on the Mercedes," Nikolai said quietly, more typing. Then Alexei's face went pale. "Boss, you're not going to like this. Show me." The screen filled with information. Vehicle registered to a shell company. 3 layers deep, but Alexei was good. He peeled them back like onion skin until a name appeared. DuPont Holdings. The room went silent. Victor swore softly in Russian. Even the new kid looked up, eyes wide. Everyone in this city knew that name. You didn't work in their world imports, exports, the profitable gray spaces between legal and not without hearing whispers about Jack DuPont, the man who controlled more of the city's underground than the mayor controlled above it. Ruthless, connected, untouchable. Why would DuPont be involved with the Matthews? Victor asked. Nikolai's mind raced. There was no logical connection. DuPont didn't know Peter Matthew, didn't have any business with construction workers or school teachers. Hell, the man probably didn't even know they existed until Tuesday night. Which meant this was random. Wrong place, wrong time. DuPont had simply been driving by when the crash happened. Bad luck for everyone. He pulled them out. Nikolai said slowly, thinking aloud. Took them to his people. That means he's invested now. DuPont doesn't do charity. If he saved them, he's protecting them. Maybe he doesn't know what they took, Alexei suggested. Maybe if we explain... You don't explain things to Jack DuPont. Nikolai's voice was ice. You avoid him. You respect his territory. You don't create problems that put you on his radar. So what do we do? That was the question, wasn't it? The money Peter Matthew had found, $2.3 million in unmarked bills, belonged to Nikolai's organization. More specifically, it belonged to his boss, Dmitry Volkov, a man who viewed lost money the way normal people viewed cancer. Unacceptable, terminal if left untreated. Dmitry had given Nikolai 1 week to recover the funds and eliminate the witnesses. 4 days remained. Failure wasn't theoretical. Last year, Dmitry had fed a man to pigs for losing half that amount. Literally, Nikolai had watched, stone-faced, while the man screamed. He couldn't go back empty-handed. But he also couldn't go to war with Jack DuPont. That was suicide dressed up as bravery. We wait, Nikolai decided. Watch the hospital. The Matthews can't stay there forever. When they leave, we move. And if DuPont's still protecting them? Nikolai lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his scarred face. Then we get creative. DuPont is powerful, but he's not everywhere. He has businesses, properties, routines. Men like him always have blind spots. You want to go after DuPont? Victor's voice carried disbelief. No, I want to make this problem disappear before it becomes his problem. There's a difference. Nikolai exhaled smoke. DuPont saved them on impulse. Good deed, bad timing. But he doesn't know them, doesn't care about them beyond whatever hero complex made him stop. You sure about that? Nikolai wasn't. Not entirely. But the alternative, accepting that Jack DuPont had deliberately chosen to shield 2 random people from Nikolai's organization, was too dangerous to consider. It meant DuPont knew about the money, knew about Dmitry, maybe even knew about the entire pipeline. And if that were true, they were already dead. Find out everything about the Matthews, Nikolai ordered. Family, friends, habits, fears. Everyone has pressure points. We find theirs. They have a daughter, Alexei said, pulling up records. Maya Matthew, 14 years old, currently staying with an aunt in... Don't. Victor's voice was sharp. Going after a kid? That crosses lines. We already threatened the kid, Nikolai reminded him coldly. That's why they ran. You having moral problems now? Victor looked away but said nothing. Nikolai understood the hesitation. There were rules, even in their world. Unwritten but real. You didn't touch children. You didn't involve innocence beyond what was necessary. You kept the violence professional, contained. But those rules existed in normal circumstances. This wasn't normal. This was survival. We don't touch the girl, Nikolai said finally. Not unless we have no choice. But we use her. Parents do stupid things to protect their children. Make Matthew think we can reach her, and he'll give us whatever we want. And DuPont? Nikolai crushed his cigarette under his heel. With luck, he'll lose interest. Rich men always do. They play hero for a night, feel good about themselves, then move on to the next distraction. And without luck? Nikolai didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window and stared out at the gray city, weighing options that all ended badly. Finally, he turned back to his men. Without luck, we'll need to remind Jack DuPont why it's dangerous to interfere with things that don't concern him. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Because challenging a man like Jack DuPont wasn't strategy, it was desperation, and desperate men made fatal mistakes. Jack made 3 phone calls before he left the hospital. The first went to a man named Raymond Cross, private investigator, former FBI, now worked exclusively for people who paid in cash and expected results without questions. Jack gave him everything Ella had told him. The scar, the accent, the threats, the timeline. Eastern European, probably Russian mob. Find out who's working this territory. Raymond's voice crackled through the line. You stepping into something territorial? I'm already in it. Just need to know who I'm dealing with. Give me 6 hours. The second call went to Dorian. Pull security on the Matthews daughter. Quiet. I want eyes on her 24/7. If anyone even looks at her wrong, I want to know about it before they finish blinking. Already done, boss. She's at an aunt's place in Riverside. I've got 2 men outside, one on the building's back exit. Jack felt something loosen in his chest. Good. Keep it invisible. The kid doesn't need to know she's being watched. Understood. The third call was the hardest. Thomas Brennan answered on the first ring. Jack, been a while. I need information on a money drop, probably dirty, hidden at a construction site off Highway 9. There was a pause. Thomas was old-school organized crime retired now, living off investments and memories, but still connected to every operation that mattered in the tri-state area. If money moved through criminal channels, Thomas knew about it. You working or cleaning up? Cleaning. Another pause. That's new for you. Times change. They really don't, Jack. But I'll ask around. What's your interest? Personal. Dangerous word in our business. So, I'm learning. Jack hung up and sat in his car outside the hospital, watching early afternoon traffic crawl past. His hands rested on the steering wheel, still faintly stained despite another scrubbing. He stared at them, remembering the weight of Ella Matthews' body as he'd pulled her from the wreck, the way Peter's hand had gripped his wrist with the desperation of a drowning man. Please, save my wife first. Something about those words had broken through 30 years of carefully constructed armor. Jack had spent decades building walls between himself and feeling anything real, walls made of violence and pragmatism, and the cold calculus of survival. But that dying man had looked at him and seen something worth appealing to, something human. Jack wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. His phone buzzed. Raymond, faster than expected. Kozlov. Nikolai Kozlov. Enforcer for Dmitry Volkov's organization. Russian. Operates primarily in the industrial district. Money laundering, protection, smuggling standard portfolio. He's careful, professional, doesn't leave bodies unless necessary. What's his connection to the construction site? Volkov's been moving cash through infrastructure projects for 2 years, buries it during foundation work, retrieves it after inspections clear. Your construction worker probably found one of their drops. How much are we talking? If it follows pattern? 2, maybe 3 million. Jack's jaw tightened. That's a lot of money to misplace. It wasn't misplaced. It was stolen. At least that's how Volkov sees it. And Volkov doesn't forgive debts. Where's Kozlov operating from? Jack. Raymond's voice carried warning. Volkov's not small time. He's got political connections, police on payroll, legitimate business fronts. You go after his people. It's not just street-level blowback. I didn't ask for a risk assessment. I asked for a location. Raymond sighed. Old auto shop. Industrial and 7th. But Jack, be smart about this. When am I not? You want a list? Jack almost smiled. Almost. Send me everything you've got on Kozlov and Volkov. Personnel, properties, patterns. I want to know how they think. Already compiling. I'll have it to you in an hour. Jack ended the call and sat in silence, mind working 3 moves ahead the way it always did. This wasn't complicated strategy, it was simple geometry. Kozlov had a problem. Jack had become part of that problem. Now he needed to become the solution before Kozlov decided to go through him instead of around him. The direct approach, confrontation, violence, elimination, was tempting, efficient. Jack had solved dozens of problems that way over the years. Walk in, make it clear who had power, walk out leaving new understandings or new graves. But this was different. The Matthews weren't criminals who'd knowingly crossed lines. They were civilians caught in machinery they didn't understand, and their daughter, 14 years old, probably terrified, definitely innocent, deserved better than becoming collateral damage in a war between men who'd chosen this life. Jack had chosen this life. The Matthews hadn't. That distinction mattered more than he wanted to admit. His phone rang again. Thomas Brennan. Your money drop belongs to Dmitry Volkov. Nasty piece of work, even by our standards. Word is he's got a timeline on recovery, 4 days left. Maybe less. After that, he'll start making examples. What kind of examples? The permanent kind. Volkov believes in spectacle. Keeps people afraid, keeps them compliant. If he thinks the Matthews stole from him, he won't just kill them. He'll make it hurt, make it public. Jack's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. What's Volkov's weakness? Same as all of us. Pride, control. He built his organization on fear and reputation. You damage either one, you damage him. How many men does he have? Maybe 20 active. Another dozen on periphery. But they're loyal. Volkov pays well and punishes disloyalty with creativity. I need to send a message, something that reaches him without starting a war. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Jack, you're talking about interfering with a recovery operation. Volkov won't see that as mediation. He'll see it as theft. You're essentially telling him the money and the people who found it are now under your protection. That's exactly what I'm telling him. Then you better make it count. Half measures with men like Volkov get people killed. If you're doing this, go all the way. Make him understand that pursuing the Matthews means going through you, and make sure he believes you're willing to burn his entire operation down if he tests you. I am willing. I know. That's what worries me. You're risking a lot for people you don't know. Maybe that's the point. Jack hung up and started the engine. He had 4 days before Volkov escalated. 4 days to dismantle Kozlov's operation, protect a family that deserved protection, and do it quietly enough that the rest of the city didn't erupt in violence. Most men would call that impossible. Jack called it Wednesday. He pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the industrial district, mind already calculating angles, leverage points, pressure zones. He'd spent 30 years building power. Now he'd spend 4 days showing why that power mattered. Not for profit, not for territory. For a dying man's last request, and for the first time in longer than Jack could remember, that felt like enough. The hospital room was too quiet when Peter Matthew opened his eyes. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the unnatural kind. The kind that comes with morphine drip and the weight of almost dying still pressed against your chest. He blinked slowly, vision swimming, ceiling tiles rotating above him like a carousel he couldn't get off. His mouth tasted like copper and regret. Easy. The voice was familiar, but Peter's brain couldn't place it through the fog. He turned his head slowly. Everything hurt, and saw a woman in the chair beside his bed. Ella, his wife. Alive. Bandaged and pale, but alive. Relief hit him so hard he couldn't breathe. Tears came before words, hot and sudden, spilling down his temples into his hair. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw, damaged. Only a rasp came out. Ella was at his side instantly, her hand finding his, squeezing gently. "I'm here. I'm okay. We're both okay." Peter's fingers tightened around hers, afraid if he let go she'd disappear. Afraid this was morphine dreaming, and he'd wake up back in the wreckage hearing metal scream and feeling her hand slip from his one last time. "Maya," he managed to croak. "Safe. She's with my sister. She doesn't know what happened. We told her we're on a work trip." The lie was mercy. Peter closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. His daughter was safe. His wife was alive. They'd survived something that should have killed them both. But fragments were returning now, the chase, the speed, losing control, the impact, and something else, something after, a man's voice, calm, commanding. "Who?" Peter's eyes opened again. "Who pulled us out?" Ella's expression shifted, complex, unreadable. "His name is Jack. Jack DuPont. He was driving behind us, saw the crash and stopped." DuPont. Peter tested the name, searching his memory. It sounded familiar. Important. The kind of name people said in whispers. Why do I know that name? Because everyone knows that name. The new voice came from the doorway. Peter's head turned too fast. Pain spiked and he saw him, the man from the crash. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a fresh shirt but the same controlled intensity that even morphine couldn't blur. Jack DuPont stepped into the room like he owned it. Maybe he did. Peter didn't know anymore. "You're awake," Jack said. Statement, not question. "You," Peter's voice was gravel. "You saved us. I pulled you out. Doctors saved you. Why?" Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You asked me to save your wife first. Seemed important." The memory hit Peter like a physical blow. The wreck, the blood, the certainty that he was dying, and this stranger's face hard, unreadable, leaning close while Peter used his last strength to beg. "I remember," Peter whispered. "I remember you." Jack said nothing. Ella squeezed Peter's hand. "He's been protecting us. The men who were chasing us, Jack's handling it." "Handling it how?" Jack pulled a chair closer and sat, elbows on his knees, studying Peter with the same intensity a chess player might study a board. "The money you found belongs to a Russian organization. Dmitry Volkov's operation. His enforcer, Nikolai Kozlov, was chasing you because he thinks you stole it. We didn't." "I know. Your wife told me. You reported it, tried to do the right thing. Unfortunately, Volkov doesn't care about right. He cares about his money and his reputation." Peter's heart hammered against his bruised ribs. "Our daughter is safe. I have people watching her. Kozlov won't touch her. How can you possibly guarantee that?" Jack's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went colder. "Because I've made it clear what happens if he tries." The certainty in his voice was absolute. Not bravado, not false comfort. Fact. Peter had heard that tone before from supervisors at construction sites telling him a wall was load-bearing, from doctors explaining his mother's diagnosis, from his daughter's principal confirming she'd made honor roll. The tone of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. But this was different. This was a man casually explaining he'd threatened Russian mobsters on behalf of strangers. "Why would you do this?" Peter asked again, needing an answer that made sense. "You don't know us. This isn't your fight." Jack leaned back slightly, silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. You were dying. You didn't ask me to save you. You asked me to save her. Of course I did. She's my wife. Most people don't think like that. When death comes, survival instinct takes over. People beg for themselves, not others. But you didn't. Your last thought wasn't fear or pain or your own life. It was her. Ella's hand tightened in Peter's. That kind of love. Jack paused, choosing words carefully. It's rare. And it reminded me that some things are worth protecting. Peter stared at him, trying to understand this stranger who spoke about love like it was a foreign language he'd only recently started learning. There was something hollow in Jack Dupont's eyes, something that had been scraped out long ago and never filled back in, until maybe now. I don't know how to thank you, Peter said. Don't. Not yet. The threat isn't gone, it's just contained. Kozlov's still looking for you. His boss wants results. I'm working on a permanent solution, but it takes time. How much time? 3 days, maybe 4. And then? Then you'll be free to go home. To your daughter. To your life. Jack stood, preparing to leave. Until then, you stay here. Both of you. Don't contact anyone outside your immediate family. Don't try to leave. Let me handle this. We can't just sit here while you risk your life. I'm not risking anything. Jack's tone was matter of fact. This is what I do. I solve problems. You're just another problem that needs solving. But Peter saw through the words, saw the lie underneath. This wasn't business for Jack Dupont. This was personal. Maybe he didn't realize it yet, or maybe he didn't want to admit it, but somewhere between pulling them from that wreck and standing in this hospital room, Jack had stopped treating them like strangers. He'd started treating them like people who mattered. Mr. Dupont, Peter said as Jack reached the door. Jack paused, hand on the frame. When this is over, when we're safe, I want to do something for you. Pay you back somehow. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. Jack turned slightly, profile sharp in the fluorescent light. You want to pay me back? Live. Raise your daughter. Love your wife. Don't waste the second chance you got. That's it? That's everything. He left without another word. Ella moved to sit on the edge of Peter's bed, careful of his injuries. They held each other in silence, listening to machines beep and footsteps echo in distant hallways. He's not what I expected, Peter finally said. What did you expect? I don't know. A hero, maybe. Someone good. And he's not? Peter thought about that. About the coldness in Jack's eyes and the warmth in his actions. The violence implied in every careful word and the gentleness with which he'd carried Ella from the wreck. I think, Peter said slowly, he's trying to be. 2 weeks later, Peter stood in the hospital lobby wearing borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, holding Ella's hand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. It was Thursday afternoon. The doctors had cleared him that morning. Bruised ribs, healing, concussion resolved, vitals stable enough to walk out under his own power. Ella had been cleared 3 days earlier but refused to leave without him. Jack Dupont was supposed to meet them at 2 o'clock. Peter checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. 1:58 p.m. He'll be here, Ella said quietly. How do you know? Because he said he would. And I don't think Jack Dupont says things he doesn't mean. She was right. Over the past 2 weeks, Jack had visited 4 times, brief check-ins, updates delivered in his characteristic economy of words. Each time, Peter had tried to get more information. Each time, Jack deflected. The situation is being handled. Kozlov's been warned. Your daughter is safe. But never details. Never proof. Just that same absolute certainty that made Peter want to believe him and terrified to trust him at the same time. Because men like Jack Dupont, men whose names people whispered about, whose presence made hospital administrators nervous, who could arrange private medical care with a single phone call, didn't do things out of kindness. Did they? At exactly 2 o'clock, the lobby doors opened. Jack walked in wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket, looking less like the blood-stained stranger from the crash and more like someone you'd pass on the street without noticing. Except you would notice. Everyone did. There was something in the way he moved, purposeful, aware, dangerous, that made people instinctively step aside. "You're ready?" he asked. Peter nodded. "Where are we going?" "To see for yourself." The drive took 40 minutes. Jack said almost nothing, navigating city streets, with the ease of someone who knew every shortcut, every blind spot, every camera. Peter and Ella sat in the back of Jack's Mercedes, hands intertwined, watching familiar neighborhoods slide past. Eventually, they left the city proper, entering industrial zones where buildings hunched against gray sky like sleeping giants. Warehouses, shipping yards, the kind of places honest people drove past without looking twice. Jack pulled into an empty lot behind an abandoned auto repair shop, killed the engine, and turned in his seat. Nikolai Kozlov operated out of this building, Jack said. Him and 3 others. They used it as a base while hunting you. Peter's stomach clenched. Used? Past tense. They're gone. Gone where? Jack's expression was unreadable. Gone. The single word carried weight Peter didn't want to examine too closely. He'd spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed imagining worst-case scenarios, Jack getting killed, protecting them, a gang war erupting, innocent people caught in crossfire. But looking at Jack now, calm and controlled, Peter realized those scenarios had been naive. Whatever Jack had done, it hadn't been clean, hadn't been legal, probably hadn't been gentle. Did you? Peter couldn't finish the question. I eliminated the threat. That's all you need to know. Ella's grip on Peter's hand tightened. Jack got out of the car. Come on, there's more. They followed him inside the building, gutted, graffitied, smelling like oil and decay. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, casting prison bar shadows across concrete. In the center of the space sat a metal case, the same case Peter had found at the construction site. His breath caught. The money, Jack said, has been returned to Volkov's organization. All of it. Along with a message explaining you never took it, never intended to keep it, and were not responsible for its temporary misplacement. How did you? I recovered it from evidence lockup before it could be officially processed. Called in some favors. Made some arrangements. The details don't matter, but they did matter. Peter understood now what Jack wasn't saying. He'd interfered with an active investigation, stolen evidence, and personally delivered dirty money back to criminals, all to clear Peter's name. Volkov accepted this? Ella asked, voice shaking. He didn't have much choice. I also made it clear that any further action against you or your family would be considered a personal insult. One I'd take very seriously. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You threatened him, Peter said. I informed him of consequences. There's a difference. What kind of consequences? Jack's eyes met his cold, flat absolute. The kind that make men like Dmitry Volkov reconsider their priorities. Peter didn't push further. Didn't want to know what kind of leverage Jack DuPont had over Russian organized crime. Didn't want to imagine what threats had been made or what promises enforced. He just wanted to believe it was over. Kozlov, Jack continued, has left the city. Permanently. His associates have been reassigned. The construction site where you found the money has been flagged in Volkov's network as compromised. They won't use it again. And your name has been removed from their files entirely. How can you be sure? Because I watched them do it. The certainty in Jack's voice was the same as always, unshakable. Absolute. Peter wanted to question it, to demand proof, to understand how any of this was possible. But standing in that empty warehouse, looking at the man who'd pulled them from death and spent 2 weeks dismantling threats Peter couldn't even comprehend, he realized questions didn't matter. Results did. And the results stood in front of him. It's over, Ella whispered. Jack nodded once. It's over. You can go home. Back to your lives. Back to your daughter. Peter felt his knees weaken. Ella caught him. Or maybe he caught her. They held each other up. 2 people who'd been running scared for so long they'd forgotten what safety felt like. I don't understand, Peter said, voice breaking. Why you did this. What we did to deserve. You didn't do anything. That's the point. Jack moved toward the door, clearly ready to leave. You were good people caught in something bad. Someone needed to fix it. I did. But why you? Jack paused, backlit by gray daylight, face half-shadowed. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, because your last thought when you were dying was saving someone you loved. And that mattered to me more than you'll ever know. He started to walk away. Wait. Peter crossed the space between them, hand outstretched. Let me pay you. Money, favors, anything. I have savings. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Jack looked at him, really looked, like he was seeing something in Peter that surprised him. I want you to go home, kiss your daughter, live your life, be happy. That's payment enough. That's not. It is. Jack's voice was firm. Trust me, it is. Peter stared at him, understanding finally clicking into place. Jack DuPont wasn't doing this for gratitude or payment or recognition. He was doing it because somewhere in the wreckage of that highway crash, he'd found something he didn't know he was looking for, a reason to be better than what he'd become. "Thank you," Peter said, the words inadequate but necessary. "For everything. For my wife. For my life. For my family." Jack's jaw tightened. He nodded once, sharp, final, and then he was gone, walking out into gray afternoon light, leaving Peter and Ella standing in an empty warehouse holding each other like survivors of a storm they barely understood, but they had survived, and that was everything. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have. Jack kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, mind somewhere else entirely. The Matthews sat in the back seat silent, processing, probably trying to make sense of the past 2 weeks. He didn't blame them. Hell, he was trying to make sense of it himself. He'd eliminated threats before. Hundreds of times, cleaned up messes, protected assets, enforced boundaries. It was what he did, what he'd always done, but this time felt different. This time, when he'd walked away from that warehouse, leaving Peter and Ella standing there alive and whole and free, something had shifted inside him. Something fundamental. Like a bone setting wrong, his entire life had finally snapped back into proper alignment. It hurt, but it also felt right. Jack dropped them at a safe house first, a modest apartment he kept for situations requiring discretion. "Stay here tonight. I'll have someone drive you home tomorrow morning, give you time to process, figure out what you want to tell your daughter." Peter nodded, still looking shell-shocked. Ella touched Jack's arm, brief, gentle. "Thank you," she said again. "I know we keep saying it, but you don't need to keep saying it." Jack's voice was softer than he intended. "Yes, we do, because men like you don't come along often. And when they do, they should be reminded they matter." Jack didn't know how to respond to that, didn't have words for the strange warmth spreading through his chest. So he just nodded and left before the moment could become something he didn't know how to handle. By the time Jack reached his own penthouse, night had fallen completely. The city sprawled below his windows, millions of lights, millions of lives, most of them touching his world without ever knowing it. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and stood at the glass, not drinking, just holding the weight of the tumbler and thinking. Dorian appeared in the doorway. "Everything wrapped up?" "Yeah." "Matthews are safe?" "Yeah." "Volkov standing down?" "For now." Dorian studied him. "You did a good thing, boss." Jack said nothing. "The guys are talking about it. What you did for those people. Some of them are calling it soft, but most are saying it's the kind of thing they wish they could do. Help someone just because it's right, you know? It wasn't about right. Then what was it about?" Jack finally took a sip, letting the burn settle in his throat before answering. "It was about remembering what it feels like to save something instead of destroy it." Dorian nodded slowly. "You've saved plenty, boss. This organization, the people in it, the neighborhoods we protect. That's not the same. That's business. Survival. Territory." Jack turned from the window. "This was different. They didn't owe me anything. I didn't owe them. There was no transaction, no leverage, no angle. Just need. And the choice to meet it. Sounds like right to me. Maybe it was." Jack wasn't sure anymore. He'd spent 30 years operating in moral gray spaces, where right and wrong were negotiable concepts, tools to be used when convenient, and discarded when not. But Peter Matthews' voice kept echoing in his head. "Please, save my wife first." That hadn't been gray. That had been the purest thing Jack had ever witnessed, love distilled down to its most essential truth, the willingness to die so someone else could live. Jack had built an empire on the opposite principle: survive at all costs. Take what you need. Protect yourself first, always, because no one else would. His father's voice, decades old but still clear. "You don't stop. Not for anything, not for anyone." But Jack had stopped. On a rain-slicked highway in the middle of nowhere, he'd stopped. And in stopping, he'd discovered something his father never understood. Sometimes stopping was the strongest thing you could do. "Boss?" Dorian's voice pulled him back. "You good?" "Yeah, I'm good." "You sure? Because you've got that look. The one you get when you're about to make a decision that changes things." Jack almost smiled. "What kind of decision?" "The kind that means the next few months are going to be interesting." Maybe Dorian was right. Because standing here now, scotch in hand, city lights reflecting off glass, Jack realized he didn't want to go back to who he'd been before the crash. The man who moved through the world like a blade, sharp, efficient, emotionless. That man had power, had respect, Had everything money and fear could buy, but he'd had nothing that mattered. "Get some rest," Jack told Dorian. "We're done for tonight. You too, boss." After Dorian left, Jack stood alone in the silence of his penthouse. Expensive furniture, expensive art, expensive everything, all of it meaningless. He thought about Peter and Ella in that safe house, probably holding each other, whispering about their daughter, making plans for a future they'd almost lost. He thought about the way Peter had offered him money, favors, anything desperate to repay a debt he couldn't quantify. And he thought about his own answer. "I want you to go home, kiss your daughter, live your life, be happy." He'd meant it, every word, because watching them walk away, seeing them get their lives back, had given Jack something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the kind that came from controlling territory or eliminating rivals or building wealth. The other kind. The kind that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, you'd left the world slightly better than you found it. Jack finished his scotch and set the glass down. Tomorrow he'd return to business. Meetings, decisions, the careful maintenance of power that kept his empire running. But something had changed. He'd always been willing to destroy for survival. Now he knew he was willing to protect for something more. And that made all the difference. His phone buzzed. A text from Raymond Cross. "Volkov's people are talking. Word is you made an impression. He's telling everyone to steer clear of anything connected to you. You've got leverage now." Jack deleted the message without responding. He didn't want leverage. Didn't want Volkov's fear or respect or whatever currency criminals traded in. He just wanted Peter and Ella Matthew to sleep soundly tonight. That was enough. Jack walked to the window one last time, pressing his palm against cold glass, looking down at the city he'd spent decades conquering. It looked different now. Softer, maybe. Or maybe he just saw it differently. Either way, he knew one thing for certain. The most dangerous thing he'd ever done wasn't building an empire or eliminating rivals or surviving in a world that ate weak men alive. It was allowing himself to care. And for the first time in 30 years, Jack DuPont wasn't afraid of what that meant. Morning came too early. Peter woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. Ella's breathing soft and steady beside him. For 3 seconds he forgot where they were. Then memory returned the warehouse. Jack's words. The impossible truth that they were safe. Actually safe. He sat up carefully, ribs still tender, and watched his wife sleep. Her face was peaceful for the first time in weeks. No fear creasing her forehead, no tension in her jaw. Just rest. Real rest. His phone sat on the nightstand, turned off for 2 weeks on Jack's orders, finally powered back on last night. 17 missed calls from Ella's sister, 32 text messages, all of them variations of the same panic. "Where are you? Is Maya okay? Please call me." He'd called last night, kept it brief. "We're fine. Coming home today. Tell Maya we love her." His sister-in-law had cried, then yelled, then cried again. Peter understood. They'd disappeared without explanation, leaving their daughter with vague excuses and promises to call. But what were they supposed to say? "We found mob money and now we're running for our lives?" Some truths were too heavy for phone calls. The apartment door opened. Peter tensed instinctively, then relaxed when Dorian walked in carrying paper bags that smelled like coffee and breakfast sandwiches. "Morning," Dorian said, setting everything on the small kitchen counter. "Boss asked me to bring food and drive you home when you're ready. No rush." "Where is he? Jack?" "Working. He doesn't really do goodbyes." Peter nodded, surprised by the disappointment he felt. He'd wanted to thank Jack one more time, shake his hand, look him in the eye and somehow convey gratitude that words couldn't hold. But maybe Jack knew that. Maybe that's why he'd stayed away. Ella emerged from the bedroom, hair messy, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She smiled when she saw the food. "Is that real coffee?" "Better be, for what I paid." Dorian grinned. "Eat up. Then we'll get you home to your kid." The drive to Riverside took 90 minutes. Peter and Ella sat in the back of a dark SUV, not Jack's Mercedes, but something equally expensive, watching suburbs slide past. Normal neighborhoods, normal people living normal lives. They'd almost lost this. Almost become cautionary tales instead of survivors. "What do we tell Maya?" Ella asked quietly. Peter had been thinking about that all morning. The truth. Part of it, anyway. That we found something we shouldn't have. That some bad people got confused. But everything's okay now. She'll have questions. Let her ask them. We'll answer what we can. And Jack? That was harder. How did you explain a man like Jack DuPont to a 14-year-old? The violence he was capable of, the power he wielded, the darkness he lived in, and the inexplicable choice he'd made to use all of it to save people he didn't know? We tell her a good man helped us when we needed it most, Peter said finally. That's the truth, too. Ella squeezed his hand. Dorian pulled up outside a modest 2-story house with a small front yard. Before the SUV fully stopped, the front door burst open, and Maya came running out, her aunt close behind. Mom, Dad? Ella was out of the car first, catching their daughter in an embrace that looked like it might never end. Peter climbed out slower, ribs protesting, but managed to wrap both arms around them anyway. Maya was crying. They were all crying. You scared me, Maya said, voice muffled against Ella's shoulder. You just left and wouldn't tell me anything, and Aunt Lisa kept saying you were fine, but she looked worried, and I thought. We're okay, baby, Ella whispered. We're okay. We're here. Don't ever do that again. We won't, I promise. Peter looked up and met Dorian's eyes over the car roof. The man nodded, once professional, respectful, then got back in the SUV and drove away without a word. Just like that, it was over. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a family reunited on a suburban lawn, holding each other like life rafts in a storm that had finally passed. That evening, after Maya had gone to bed reluctantly, afraid they might disappear again, Peter and Ella sat on their back porch drinking tea and watching stars emerge. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Ella admitted. For men to show up, for the phone to ring with bad news. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's not going to. Jack made sure of that. How can one man have that much power? Peter didn't have an answer. Jack DuPont was a mystery, violence and mercy, darkness and light, all wrapped up in tailored suits and quiet certainty. I want to do something for him, Peter said. I know he said he doesn't want anything, but that doesn't feel right. Just walking away after everything he did. What could we possibly give him that he doesn't already have? That was the question, wasn't it? Jack had money, power, influence, everything material wealth could provide. What could a construction foreman and a school teacher offer that would mean anything? Then Peter remembered something Jack had said in the warehouse. I want you to go home, kiss your daughter, live your life, be happy. That's payment enough. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the gift Jack wanted wasn't something they could give directly. It was something they had to become. Living proof that his choice had mattered. We live well, Peter said quietly. We love each other. We raise Maya right. We don't waste this second chance. That's what he wanted. That's what we give him. Ella was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Then that's what we'll do. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, watching the city lights glow in the distance. Somewhere out there, Jack DuPont was moving through his world of shadows and power. But because of him, Peter and Ella Matthew were sitting safely in theirs, and that was a debt they'd spend the rest of their lives honoring. Not with money or favors or grand gestures, but by simply living, fully, gratefully, together, the way he'd asked them to. Jack stood at the crash site at midnight, hands in his pockets, staring at the section of highway where everything had changed. The skid marks were still visible, long black streaks across asphalt where the Matthews sedan had lost control. The streetlight they'd hit bore a fresh dent. Broken glass still glittered in the gutter, reflecting sodium lamplight like scattered stars. 3 weeks had passed since he'd pulled Peter and Ella from this wreckage. 3 weeks since a dying man had looked at him and asked for mercy Jack didn't know he possessed. The city had moved on. Traffic flowed normally. The crash was forgotten by everyone except the 3 people it had touched most deeply. But Jack came back anyway. Not for sentimentality, he wasn't built for that, but for perspective. To remind himself what this place represented. The moment when 30 years of carefully constructed walls had cracked open, letting something unexpected through. Humanity, compassion, choice. His phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Brennan. Heard the Matthews made it home safe. You did good, kid. Jack didn't respond. Didn't need to. Thomas understood that some things didn't require acknowledgement. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. Thank you. For everything. We won't forget. P.M. Peter Matthew. Probably sent from his newly restored phone, probably after hours of debating whether to reach out. Jack read it twice, then put his phone away without replying. What was there to say? You're welcome? That felt insufficient. It was nothing? That would be a lie. You changed my life? Too honest, too vulnerable, too much. So he said nothing. But he kept the message. A car approached, expensive, Familiar. Jack didn't turn around as Dorian pulled up and got out, joining him at the roadside. You come here a lot now, Dorian observed. Twice. That's a lot for you. Fair point. Jack rarely visited places that didn't serve immediate purpose, but this stretch of highway pulled at him in ways he didn't fully understand. The men are asking questions, Dorian continued. Not bad ones, just curious about what you're planning. Planning? You've been different since the Matthews. Quieter, more careful. They want to know if that's permanent or just a phase. Jack considered that. He had been different, more deliberate in his decisions, slower to violence, quicker to look for alternatives. Not soft exactly, just precise, choosing battles that mattered instead of fighting every one that presented itself. Tell them I haven't gone soft, Jack said. Tell them I've just gotten better at choosing what deserves my attention. And the Matthews deserved it? Yes. Why? Jack watched headlights stream past on the highway, anonymous cars full of anonymous people living anonymous lives. Any one of them could have stopped that night, could have pulled over, called for help, made a difference, but they hadn't. Only Jack had. Because someone needed to, Jack said finally, and I was there. Dorian nodded slowly, understanding something unspoken. You going to do this again? Help random people? I don't know. And that was honest. Jack wasn't planning to become some vigilante savior, cruising streets looking for people to rescue. That wasn't who he was. Wasn't who he'd ever be. But if another moment came, another crash, another plea, another chance to be more than what he'd spent decades becoming, he thought maybe he wouldn't drive past. Maybe he'd stop again. For what it's worth, Dorian said, I think you did the right thing, and I think the old man would have been proud. Jack's jaw tightened. His father. The man who'd taught him never to stop, never to care, never to let emotion compromise survival. No, Jack said quietly. He would have called me weak. Then maybe he was wrong. Maybe. Or maybe strength came in different forms than his father had understood. Maybe the hardest thing wasn't becoming a blade sharp and cutting and emotionless. Maybe the hardest thing was staying human. They stood in silence, two men at a crash site, surrounded by evidence of disaster and resurrection. Finally, Dorian spoke again. You know they'll tell people, right? The Matthews. They'll tell their story, and your name will come up, probably. That doesn't worry you? People knowing Jack DuPont did something decent? Let them know. Jack turned from the highway, heading back to the car. Might do us good. Remind people we're not just monsters. We're not? Jack paused, hand on the car door. No, we're not. We're just men who made choices. Some good, some bad. But we're still capable of choosing differently when it matters. He got in the car. Dorian followed, starting the engine, pulling back onto the highway. As they drove away, Jack looked in the side mirror, watching the crash site recede into darkness. In 3 weeks, the skid marks would fade. In 3 months, new asphalt would cover them completely. In 3 years, no physical evidence would remain that anything had happened there at all. But Jack would remember. He'd remember a dying man's last words. He'd remember the weight of Ella Matthews' body as he'd carried her from the wreck. He'd remember the choice he'd made to stop instead of drive past. And he'd remember that for once, just once, he'd been the reason someone lived instead of the reason they didn't. That memory would stay with him forever, long after the scars healed and the city forgot, because some things changed you in ways that couldn't be undone. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the most dangerous thing Jack DuPont had ever done wasn't building an empire or eliminating rivals or surviving in a world that ate weak men alive. Maybe the most dangerous thing he'd ever done was proving to himself that he was capable of mercy. That beneath 30 years of carefully constructed armor, beneath the violence and the power and the cold calculations, there was still something human, still something worth saving. Jack closed his eyes and let the city lights blur past the window. Tomorrow he'd return to business, to meetings and decisions and the careful maintenance of power. But tonight, driving through darkness, he allowed himself one small moment of peace, because somewhere in this city, a family was sleeping safely. And Jack DuPont, feared, powerful, untouchable, had been the one to make that possible, not through violence, not through fear, but through a choice, the choice to stop, and that made all the difference. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.